You've found the Stealth Podcast. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Subscribe and comment to support us. Thanks. Let's begin. My encounter in Morro Bay started as a simple overnight stop, but turned into a nightmare involving an ancient cult that worships the massive Morro Rock. As a former geology student turned van dweller, I was fascinated by the volcanic plugs formation. But after witnessing a ritual and accidentally interrupting it, I became the target of ritualists who believe I must be sacrificed. What I discovered about Morro Bay's true history and what actually lives beneath the iconic landmark will haunt me forever, if I even survive to tell the tale. My name is Rhiannon Walsh. I'm 31 years old and originally from Denver, Colorado. 6 weeks ago, I was just another van lifer passing through Morro Bay, captivated like countless tourists by the massive volcanic monolith rising from the harbor. With my background in geology before I abandoned academia to live on the road, I was particularly fascinated by Morro Rock, one of the Nine Sisters, a chain of extinct volcanic plugs stretching inland. My converted Sprinter van had been my home for nearly 2 years, funding my nomadic lifestyle through freelance scientific illustration and the occasional guided nature tour. I had planned to stay just 2 nights in Morro Bay before continuing down Highway 1, but the rocks seemed to call to me, demanding closer examination. The locals I encountered that first day were welcoming enough, though several made oddly similar comments about respecting the rock and not staying past sunset along certain stretches of beach. I dismissed these as standard environmental protection concerns, nesting birds, sensitive habitat, that sort of thing. At a small coffee shop, I struck up a conversation with the barista, Eliza, who shared my interest in geology. When I mentioned wanting to photograph Morro Rock at night under the new moon for the perfect silhouette, her previously friendly demeanor shifted subtly. "The rock doesn't like visitors after dark," she said with a forced smile. "Harbor Patrol enforces a strict curfew." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't about official regulations. That evening, I parked my van at what locals called the Spit, a narrow stretch of beach with an unobstructed view of the rock. As sunset painted the monolith in dramatic oranges and reds, I noticed unusual activity around its base. Small boats approaching from different directions, people disembarking and disappearing behind the rock's seaward face, where I knew there shouldn't be any accessible shore. Curiosity piqued. I grabbed my camera with its powerful zoom lens and focused on the activity. What I captured would upend everything I thought I knew about this seemingly picturesque coastal town. Figures in dark hooded clothing arranging objects and patterns on a hidden beach, and most disturbingly, something massive moving beneath the water surface around the rock, something far too large to be any known marine animal. I didn't realize I was being watched until I lowered my camera and found an elderly man standing beside my van, his weathered face expressionless. "You shouldn't be photographing the gathering," he said quietly. "The Guardians won't approve." Before I could respond, he reached through my open window and drew a strange symbol on my map, a stylized rock with curved lines beneath it. "You've been marked as an observer now. They'll come for you before dawn. If you value your life, drive north until sunrise and don't return." He walked away before I could question him further, disappearing into the growing darkness with surprising speed for his age. I might have dismissed his warning as the ramblings of a local eccentric, except for what happened next. Every electronic device in my van simultaneously lost power, including my camera. When they reset moments later, all my photos from that evening were gone. I should have left immediately, but academic curiosity, the same trait that had driven my geology studies, overrode my instincts. Instead of fleeing, I relocated my van to a busier campground, believing safety lay in numbers. Sleep came fitfully that night, punctuated by strange dreams of swimming through darkness toward a pulsing light embedded deep within stone. I woke shortly before dawn to find my van surrounded by small pebbles arranged in the same symbol the old man had drawn on my map. More disturbing was the fine black sand covering my windshield, sand I recognized from my studies as volcanic in origin, though the nearest active volcano was hundreds of miles away. The morning brought more unsettling experiences. At a local market, conversation stopped when I entered, resuming only after I'd passed. A child pointed at me, asking her mother why the rock had chosen me. When I tried to fuel up my van, The attendant refused service, his eyes never meeting mine as he claimed his pumps were down for maintenance, despite actively serving other customers. Most concerning was what I found when I returned to my van. My door unlocked despite my certainty of securing it, and on my pillow, a small stone carving depicting a human figure being absorbed into rock. Beneath it lay a note with elegant handwriting. The observer becomes the observed. Tonight you will understand. Resistance brings suffering. I sought answers at the local historical society, where an anxious curator reluctantly shared information after I mentioned the Guardians. The official history of Morro Bay described Portuguese settlers establishing the town in the late 1800s, but according to the curator, the settlement's true origins were darker. The first Europeans to arrive discovered an indigenous tribe performing rituals around the rock, communicating with something they believed lived within it. When settlers forcibly stopped these rituals, a series of devastating earthquakes and tidal phenomena followed, ceasing only when certain townspeople adopted modified versions of the indigenous practices. The rock requires acknowledgement, the curator whispered, glancing nervously at the door. Every new moon, the Guardians make offerings to ensure it remains dormant. As afternoon faded toward evening, I made my decision. I would observe the ritual again, this time from a safer distance with backup precautions. I positioned my van on a distant overlook with clear sight lines to the rock, set up my spare camera with an automatic upload to cloud storage, and prepared to document whatever secret ceremony took place. As sunset approached, boats again converged on the hidden beach, more numerous than before. Through my lens, I counted at least 30 robed figures, their hoods now pulled back to reveal ordinary townspeople I recognized. The barista, the market cashier, even the refusing gas station attendant. They arranged themselves in concentric circles around a central altar-like structure, all facing a tall figure in distinctive red robes who raised their arms toward the darkening sky. That's when the water around Morro Rock began to glow with an unnatural blue-green light, and the rock itself seemed to shift slightly, as if something within was stirring. What happened next defied explanation. The surface of Morro Rock rippled like liquid despite being solid basalt. Sections appeared to become temporarily transparent, revealing a honeycomb of chambers within, illuminated by the same blue-green light emanating from the water. Through my camera's viewfinder, I watched in horror as something emerged partially from the largest chamber, a massive appendage that seemed neither tentacle nor limb, but something wholly alien, reaching toward the gathered Guardians. The red-robed leader approached this manifestation, presenting what appeared to be a small, struggling form. With nauseating clarity, I realized it was a human bound in ceremonial wrappings. As this offering was accepted by the appendage and drawn back into the rock, my camera suddenly overheated in my hands, the lens cracking with a sharp report that echoed across the quiet harbor. The entire assembly below froze, then as one, turned to look directly at my distant position. Impossible. I was nearly a mile away, concealed by darkness. Yet somehow, they knew exactly where I was. The red-robed leader pointed in my direction, and several Guardians broke from the circle, moving toward boats. I scrambled into my van, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to start the engine. As I sped away from the overlook, my rearview mirror showed multiple headlights converging on the spot I'd just vacated. My plan was simple: reach Highway 1 and drive north as the old man had advised, putting as much distance between myself and Morro Bay as possible. I never made it to the highway. Every road I took somehow looped back toward the harbor, impossible redirections that defied the town's geography. Street signs changed or disappeared entirely. Familiar landmarks appeared in wrong locations. It was as if the town itself was reconfiguring to trap me. When I finally reached what should have been the highway on-ramp, I found myself instead at the harbor parking lot, facing Morro Rock across the water. Worse, my van began to change, the metal of the hood developing a strange texture like cooling lava, the windows clouding with a mineral film. The dashboard instruments flickered between normal readings and incomprehensible symbols that matched what I'd seen carved into the central altar during the ritual. Most terrifying was the realization that my van's electronics were no longer responding to my commands. The vehicle was driving itself, heading directly toward the harbor boat launch. With the van now clearly possessed by whatever force protected the rock, I abandoned it just before it drove off the boat ramp into the dark water. I ran blindly through unfamiliar streets that seemed to shift around me, buildings appearing and disappearing in my peripheral vision. The few people I encountered turned away as if unable to see me, their faces briefly revealing inhuman features when they thought I wasn't looking. Eyes too large, mouths extending too far, skin temporarily showing the texture of volcanic stone. Eventually, exhausted and disoriented, I found myself trapped at the base of a small hill overlooking the harbor. Ahead lay water on 3 sides, behind me a semicircle of approaching headlights. As the vehicle stopped and robed figures emerged, I realized with horrific clarity why the Guardians had been so concerned about my observations. I hadn't just witnessed their ritual, I had interrupted the rock's feeding cycle. Now it required a substitute for the energy it had lost when my camera disrupted the transfer. The Guardians surrounded me with practiced efficiency, their movements suggesting this wasn't the first time they'd cornered an outsider who'd seen too much. The red-robed leader approached, finally lowering her hood to reveal Eliza, the barista from my first day in town. "The Rock has chosen you twice now," she said, her voice carrying unnatural harmonics that made my teeth ache. "First as observer, now as offering. This is a rare honor." As she spoke, the ground beneath my feet began to warm, fine cracks appearing in the soil, exuding that same blue-green light I'd seen around the rock. Through these fissures, I could feel something vast and ancient turning its attention toward me, a consciousness so alien and enormous that my mind recoiled from even the edges of contact with it. "What's in the rock isn't a god," I said desperately, playing for time while scanning for escape routes. "I'm a geologist. That's a volcanic plug, not some mystical entity." My scientific protest drew cold smiles from the gathered Guardians. Eliza approached, holding out a stone tablet covered in symbols. "These records date back 12,000 years, she explained. "Long before humans settled here, it arrived, a being from the stars that burrowed into the forming magma chamber. The eruptions, the Nine Sisters formation, all it's doing, creating suitable vessels as it slowly adapted to Earth's environment. What sleeps beneath Morro Rock is merely its primary node, an anchor point. Its true body extends for miles through underground chambers, feeding on energies your science cannot yet measure." As she spoke, 2 Guardians grasped my arms, their hands burning cold against my skin. Where they touched, my flesh began to transform, becoming grainy and rigid like solidifying lava. The sensation spread slowly up my limbs as they dragged me toward a waiting boat. My mind raced desperately, seeking any leverage against what seemed inevitable. Then I remembered something crucial from my geology studies, the composition of Morro Rock itself. "Your god is dying," I gasped, the words difficult as the transformation reached my chest. "The rock is primarily rhyolite and dacite, highly silicic. They're acidic, essentially poison to deep ocean organisms. It's not thriving here. It's been trapped, slowly dying for millennia." The reaction was immediate. Eliza's confident expression faltered, and murmurs spread through the gathered Guardians. Taking advantage of their momentary confusion, I broke free, the partially transformed portions of my arms shattering like brittle stone, sending excruciating pain through my body. I ran toward the water, not toward the open harbor where their boats waited, but toward a narrow tidal channel I'd noticed earlier. The Guardians pursued, but hesitated at the water's edge. Through my pain-hazed consciousness, I realized why. The channel connected to a freshwater stream flowing into the harbor, its chemistry different enough from seawater to form a boundary their transformed bodies couldn't cross. I waded in, each step agony as the transformation reversed, fragments of stone sloughing off to reveal raw flesh beneath. Behind me, Eliza raised her arms, and the ground began to tremble. "It doesn't matter where you run," she called after me. "The rock has tasted you now. Part of you will always remain connected, always drawing you back." I struggled through the channel until I reached the opposite shore, finding myself near a busy roadside diner just opening for early morning service. Normal people, tourists and truckers, completely unaware of what had transpired miles away. I stumbled inside, collapsed into a booth, and begged a startled waitress to call for help. As emergency services were contacted, I glanced out the window toward Morro Rock in the distance. For a brief moment, the massive monolith seemed transparent again, revealing the honeycomb of chambers within and the massive form that occupied them. A crystalline entity with countless appendages, its central mass pulsing with that same blue-green light. Most disturbing was the sense that it was looking directly back at me, a tendril of its consciousness still connected to my mind despite the distance. The last thing I remembered before passing out was the certainty that part of me remained trapped within the rock, and part of it now existed within me. I spent 3 weeks in a San Luis Obispo hospital, diagnosed with severe dehydration, exposure, and what doctors termed psychotic episodes triggered by hallucinogenic compounds they found in my bloodstream. My injuries were documented as consistent with falling on rocky terrain while disoriented. No one believed my account of what had happened in Morro Bay. The few times I convinced hospital staff to contact authorities about my claims of human sacrifice, the responding officers were inevitably members of the Guardians, their subtle identifying marks visible only to me, tiny flecks of volcanic glass embedded in their skin, eyes that momentarily reflected blue-green when they thought I wasn't looking. Upon release, I discovered the extent of the Guardian's influence. My van had been recovered, completely restored with no trace of its transformation, though the engine now emitted a faint humming that matched the frequency I'd heard during the ritual. My cameras contained no images from that night, my cloud storage mysteriously emptied. Most disturbing was finding small volcanic stones in my pockets that I never placed there, each carved with symbols matching those on the altar. Every time I discarded them, new ones appeared. My dreams became increasingly vivid, not nightmares about what I'd witnessed, but seductive visions of power and knowledge offered by the entity in the rock, promises of evolutionary transcendence if I would simply return and complete the interrupted communion. The physical changes were harder to hide as weeks passed. My skin developed a faint iridescence in certain light, reminiscent of the glow around Morro Rock. Tiny crystals formed at my fingertips, which I had to file away daily. Most alarming was my newfound ability to manipulate small stones without touching them, and the way electronics malfunctioned in my presence, screens displaying momentary glimpses of symbols identical to those on the altar. I've tried escaping to inland states, even flying to the East Coast, but the pull remains. Each night, no matter where I sleep, I wake to find myself oriented perfectly toward Morro Bay, as if some internal compass constantly recalibrates to its location. The true horror isn't what dwells beneath Morro Rock, but the realization that I'm becoming something other than human, a hybrid, partially transformed during my escape. Through this connection, I've learned the terrible truth. The entity isn't trapped as I'd thought. Morro Rock is not its prison, but its cocoon, and my interruption of the ritual accelerated its metamorphosis. The offerings weren't sustaining it, but delaying its awakening until it had fully adapted to Earth. Now that process is speeding up, with fragments of its consciousness spreading through humans like me. Unwitting carriers preparing the way for something far worse than sacrifice. I'm writing this warning from a motel room in Arizona, fighting the overwhelming compulsion to return to the coast. If you're traveling through Morro Bay, avoid the rock shadow at all costs. And if a stranger with slightly iridescent skin offers to tell you about local geological formations, run. What speaks to you isn't entirely human anymore. My name is Vanessa Klein. I'm 35 years old and originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I never imagined that my quest for solitude in Mendocino would lead to such horror. After my divorce last year, I cashed out my portion of our assets and invested in a beautifully converted ProMaster van. I'd spent 15 years building someone else's dream as a corporate attorney, and now it was finally time to build my own. 3 months into my journey down the Pacific coast, I'd established a comfortable routine of remote work and exploration. Mendocino's rugged coastline, with its sea caves and hidden coves, seemed like the perfect place to spend a peaceful week off the grid. The locals warned me about Angel's Drop, a stunning but treacherous cliff area where several hikers had vanished over the years, but I dismissed their concerns as the usual cautionary tales told to outsiders. I found a secluded spot near the headlands, far enough from the main tourist areas to avoid rangers, but with breathtaking views of the ocean. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. quiet mornings with coffee watching the fog lift, afternoons exploring the nearby beaches, and evenings working on my novel. On the third day, I hiked out to Angel's Drop, drawn by stories of its unparalleled beauty. The locals weren't wrong. The sheer cliff face dropped nearly 200 feet to a churning sea, with a natural stone arch jutting out over the abyss. What caught my attention, though, was a narrow path leading down the cliff face that wasn't on any of my hiking maps. Curiosity got the better of me, and I carefully made my way down, discovering a small cave entrance partially hidden by rocks. Inside the cave was a bizarre sight. Dozens of small figurines arranged in concentric circles, all facing a crude altar made of driftwood and bone. Each figurine appeared handcrafted, some obviously decades old, others much newer, but all sharing disturbing similarities. Humanoid bodies with distorted limbs and hollowed spaces where faces should be. More unsettling was what I found when I moved closer to examine them. Each contained a small personal item, a lock of hair, a piece of jewelry, a driver's license. At the center of the altar sat an ancient-looking book bound in what appeared to be weathered leather, its pages covered in faded handwriting and disturbing illustrations of human transformations. I should have left immediately, reported what I'd found to authorities. Instead, I made the fatal mistake of taking photos, even pocketing one of the smaller figurines as evidence. Only later did I notice the writing on its base, Vanessa K., Minneapolis. The impossibility of this, my name, my hometown, on an object in a cave I'd randomly discovered, left me paralyzed with fear. As I hastily climbed back up the cliff path, I glanced back toward the cave entrance to see a figure standing there watching me, tall and gaunt with unnaturally long limbs, its face obscured by shadow despite the bright afternoon sun. When I blinked, it was gone. That night, parked back at my secluded spot, I heard the first scratching sounds on my van's roof. The scratching continued intermittently through the night, always stopping when I moved to investigate. By morning, I convinced myself it was just tree branches, though deep down I knew there were no trees close enough to touch my van. I examined my roof to find strange markings, not scratches but what looked like symbols burned into the metal, arranged in a perfect circle. The figurine I'd taken now sat on my dashboard, though I distinctly remembered hiding it in a storage compartment under my bed. When I tried to throw it out, my fingers refused to release it, as if the small wooden object had somehow fused to my skin. Only after several panicked minutes did my grip finally loosen, but by then, I'd noticed something even more disturbing. My reflection in the van's mirror showed dark hollows forming around my eyes, mirroring the faceless figurines. I drove into town immediately, seeking help or at least cell service to research what I'd found. The local cafe fell silent when I entered, every patron turning to stare. The barista, an elderly woman with sea glass green eyes, took one look at me and her expression shifted from welcome to horror. "You've been to the drop," she stated flatly. When I stammered confirmation, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, examining my palm where a small symbol had appeared overnight, a spiral with what looked like a stylized wave. "The Hollow Folk have marked you," she whispered. "They've been taking people for generations, visitors who discover their sanctuary. You have until the next full moon before the change completes." That was just 3 days away. The librarian was more forthcoming, though she insisted on speaking outside, away from other patrons. What she told me explained the town's strange reaction. According to local history, Mendocino was founded after a ship carrying European settlers wrecked offshore in 1851. The survivors were saved by what they described as people from the caves, beings who could withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. In exchange for teaching the settlers survival skills, these beings requested occasional companions who would be transformed to join them in their underwater domain. Over generations, this evolved into a pact. The town would flourish through tourism and fishing, and in return, they would look away when visitors occasionally disappeared near Angel's Drop, becoming what locals called the Hollow Folk. My options were limited. The mark on my palm was spreading slowly up my wrist, darkening my veins. When I tried to drive out of town, my van inexplicably broke down at the township boundary, the engine flooding with seawater despite being nowhere near the ocean. A mechanic refused to even look at it once he saw my marked palm. The local sheriff, who the librarian had warned was deeply involved in maintaining the pact, began driving past my disabled van with unsettling frequency. I was trapped, the transformation advancing, my skin developing a waxy translucence, the hollows around my eyes deepening. In desperation, I sought out the one person the librarian suggested might help, an elderly woman living in isolation on the outskirts of town, supposedly descended from someone who had begun the transformation but had somehow reversed it. The old woman's cottage sat precariously on a bluff overlooking the same stretch of coastline as Angel's Drop, though from a different angle. Eleanor Pierce was at least 90, her cottage filled with protection symbols similar to those I'd seen in the cave, but inverted or altered. She examined my palm without touching it, then wordlessly handed me a mirror. What I saw shattered my remaining composure. My eyes were now completely black hollows, my skin translucent enough to see shadowy movements beneath, like something else was taking residence inside me. "The transformation is accelerating," she observed. "They're eager for you. You must have something they particularly want." When I asked what could be done, her answer was cryptic. "To escape the hollow folk, you must give them something of equal value. A trade. That's how my grandmother survived." She offered them another. That night, sleeping on Eleanor's floor as she worked on a protective tincture, I woke to find my body moving against my will. I watched in helpless horror as I rose, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if my limbs were being puppeteered. I was being dragged toward the door, toward the cliffs, toward the cave. Eleanor intercepted me, throwing a cord of woven seaweed around my neck. The effect was immediate. Whatever force controlled me retreated, though not completely. Through the window, I could see them, 5 elongated figures standing at the cliff's edge, their bodies seeming to ripple and distort in the moonlight. One raised an impossibly long arm, pointing directly at me. In that moment, every mirror and reflective surface in Eleanor's cottage shattered simultaneously. My transformation accelerated through the following day. The hollow spaces spread to my cheeks, my skin developed a sheen like wet paper, and worst of all, I began to hear them, whispering promises of eternal life beneath the waves, in voices that seemed to speak directly into my mind. Eleanor worked frantically on her counter-ritual, explaining between labored breaths that the hollow folk were ancient beings who had evolved in the ocean depths but needed human vessels to survive in shallower waters. The figurines in the cave contained essence fragments of everyone they'd taken over the centuries. My taking one had created a direct connection, accelerating the usual transformation timeline from weeks to days. By sunset, I found myself unable to speak, my voice replaced by a guttural clicking sound. Eleanor finally presented me with a small vial of murky liquid. "Drink this at the center of their cave, where the altar stands. It will release all the essences they've collected. The backlash will be significant." I set out for Angel's Drop at midnight, the full moon illuminating the coastal path with an eerie silver light. My body moved with increasingly fluid grace despite my deteriorating condition. I no longer felt pain or fatigue and could see perfectly in the darkness. The transformation had progressed to where patches of my skin had split open, revealing a glistening, scaled surface underneath. The descent down the cliff face was terrifyingly easy, my new form instinctively finding handholds invisible to human eyes. The cave entrance had widened since my first visit, as if the cliff itself was reshaping to welcome me. Inside, the figurines had been rearranged to form a path leading deeper into the cave, toward a previously hidden tunnel that sloped downward toward the sound of crashing waves. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber where the sea had broken through, creating a dark lagoon. Standing in a semicircle at the water's edge were 7 of the hollow folk, their true forms now visible to my transformed eyes. They were vaguely humanoid, but with elongated limbs that bent at additional joints, skin that shifted between translucence and mirror-like reflectivity, and where faces should be, only smooth surfaces with vertical slits that pulsed with bioluminescent light. One stepped forward, its arm extending impossibly to touch my cheek. A voice resonated directly in my mind. "You are nearly ready. Your essence is strong, an artist's perception, a lawyer's precision. You will thrive among us." The others moved aside, revealing what appeared to be my exact duplicate lying on a stone altar. A perfect clone of my human form, but empty, hollowed out. waiting for whatever part of me remained to be extracted and stored in the figurine. Eleanor's plans suddenly seemed impossible. There were too many of them, and my transformation was too advanced. I could feel my consciousness fragmenting, my human thoughts becoming harder to maintain. As they surrounded me, guiding me toward the altar where my duplicate lay, I fumbled for the vial in my pocket. One of them noticed, moving with blinding speed to grasp my wrist. Another has interfered. It communicated to the others. The pierced bloodline continues to resist. In that moment of distraction, I made my desperate move. Instead of attempting to reach the altar as Eleanor had instructed, I hurled the vial directly into the lagoon. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The water erupted into blinding light, thousands of spectral forms rising from its depths. The trapped essences of all they had taken over centuries suddenly released. The chamber filled with a cacophony of voices as the spirits flew in chaotic patterns, some passing through me and temporarily reversing aspects of my transformation. The hollow folk shrieked in a frequency that cracked the stone walls, reaching desperately for the escaping essences. In the chaos, I clawed my way back up the tunnel, my body fluctuating between human and hollow as different spirits passed through me. Behind me, the cave began collapsing as the spirit's energy destabilized the entire structure. I emerged onto the cliff face just as a massive section slid into the sea. My van, mysteriously now parked at the top of the cliff, started on its own as I approached, its headlights illuminating a figure waiting beside it. Eleanor, her expression grim. "Drive," she commanded. "Don't stop until sunrise. What follows can't cross running water in daylight." As I sped away, the rearview mirror showed dozens of elongated silhouettes emerging from the sea onto the moonlit beach before the mirror cracked completely and fell apart. 6 months have passed since that night in Mendocino. The physical transformation has largely reversed. My face is whole again, though my eyes remain oddly reflective in certain light, and faint scale patterns are visible on my skin when I'm near salt water. I abandoned my van at the California-Oregon border, too haunted by the memory of it starting on its own that night. Local news reported a significant coastal landslide at Angel's Drop, destroying an archaeologically significant Native American site, and tragically killing local historian Eleanor Pierce, whose cottage was swept into the sea. The official story made no mention of underground chambers or figurines. I thought I had escaped relatively unscathed until the dreams began. Vivid visions of gliding through midnight waters, of breathing liquid instead of air, of a vast community living in the crushing depths. Sometimes I wake to find my sheets soaking wet with salt water, or small pools forming around my feet when I stand too long in one place. Worst of all are the reflections, not just mine, but everyone's. I see what's beneath their human exteriors, glimpses of hollow spaces where solid flesh should be. I've discovered I can now identify others who have encountered the hollow folk, a subtle difference in how light passes through their eyes, visible only to those who've been partially transformed. The true horror revealed itself when I finally worked up the courage to visit Minneapolis and check on my storage unit containing family heirlooms. Among them was a photo album I hadn't opened in years. There, in a faded photo from 1973, my grandmother stood on a cliff I instantly recognized as Angel's Drop. The resemblance to Eleanor Pierce was unmistakable. The final piece clicked when I found my grandmother's journal, detailing her encounter with people from the deep and how she escaped by offering someone else in her place, a random hitchhiker she'd picked up. The journal ended with a warning that they would eventually come for her bloodline, that the debt would transfer through generations until paid. Now I understand the truth too late. I was never randomly chosen. The hollow folk had been waiting for me specifically for decades. My sudden impulse to leave everything behind, my inexplicable attraction to Vanlife and the California coast, all of it subtly influenced from afar. Eleanor wasn't trying to save me. She was completing what her grandmother, my grandmother, had started. The ritual wasn't prevented that night. It was fulfilled differently. The essence vial contained not a potion, but a catalyst, binding fragments of the hollow folk to me permanently while releasing the others. I'm neither fully human nor fully hollow now, caught between worlds. Sometimes, near the ocean, I hear them calling still, promising family, belonging, purpose. And every day, the call grows harder to resist. If you're traveling the coast and meet a woman with oddly reflective eyes offering help or directions, particularly near water, run. What appears human may be merely a vessel for something ancient and patient, seeking new companions for the depths. My name is Caleb Thorne. I'm 32 years old and currently live in Portland, Oregon. What happened to me in Big Sur last summer wasn't just terrifying. It shattered everything I believed about the peaceful solitude of Vanlife. I had been living on the road for nearly 2 years in my converted Sprinter, documenting scenic spots for my moderately successful travel blog. That fateful week along Highway 1 was supposed to be another picturesque chapter. Instead, it became a nightmare tied to an old local legend I should have taken seriously. The foggy coastline of Big Sur had always been calling to me. Something about those dramatic cliffs plunging into the churning Pacific, the redwoods standing like ancient sentinels in the mist. I'd planned this segment of my journey meticulously, mapping out hidden pullouts where I could stealth camp for a few nights without drawing attention. My girlfriend Mara had flown in from Chicago to join me for this stretch, her first time experiencing my nomadic lifestyle. She was captivated by the rugged beauty of the place almost immediately, her camera constantly clicking as we wound our way down the coastal highway. We found the perfect spot just before sunset, a little unmarked turnout hidden from the main road by a thick cluster of trees, offering a breathtaking view of the ocean below. The area didn't have explicit "no camping" signs, which in van life terms meant fair game. I maneuvered my rig into position, leveled it carefully with my hydraulic jacks, and we settled in for what should have been a peaceful evening. Mara uncorked a bottle of wine while I prepared dinner on my compact propane stove, both of us buzzing with that particular joy that comes from knowing you're experiencing something few others get to see. As the sun dipped below the horizon, an unusual heaviness settled over the area. The fog rolled in faster than normal, obscuring our view and bringing with it a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep through the van's insulation. We didn't think much of it at the time. Big Sur was known for its dramatic weather shifts. But looking back, I should have noticed how unnaturally quiet it had become. No distant traffic sounds from Highway 1, no calling birds, not even the usual crash of waves against the cliffs below. Just a profound, suffocating silence that, in retrospect, was the first warning that something was terribly wrong. The trouble began around midnight. I woke to a strange tapping on the roof of the van, rhythmic and deliberate, like fingers drumming patiently. Mara slept soundly beside me, but I lay frozen, ears straining in the darkness. I convinced myself it was just tree branches scraping against metal, though deep down I knew there were no trees directly above us. Still, I wasn't about to step outside in the thick fog to investigate. That was my first mistake, ignoring what every instinct was screaming at me. By morning, the fog had thinned slightly, and we discovered strange symbols etched into the dirt surrounding our van. Circular patterns with intricate designs that looked freshly drawn. Probably just local kids messing with us, I assured Mara, though her face had gone pale. She showed me her research on her phone. Stories about the Watchers of Big Sur, entities said to guard certain sacred spots along the coast, who supposedly marked trespassers before making them disappear into the mist. I laughed it off as local folklore designed to scare tourists, but Mara wasn't convinced. She wanted to leave immediately. I stubbornly insisted we stay another night, arguing we couldn't let superstition ruin our plans. That afternoon, while hiking a nearby trail, we encountered an elderly local who eyed us with uncanny recognition. "You're parked at Whispering Point," he stated, not a question. My blood ran cold. We hadn't told anyone where we'd camped. When I reluctantly confirmed, his weathered face darkened. "They've marked you already," he muttered, gesturing to a small red mark on my hand I hadn't noticed before, a perfect circle with a dot in the center, identical to the one on Mara's wrist. He warned us that we had disturbed sacred ground, that the Watchers didn't distinguish between ignorance and disrespect. We needed to perform a specific ritual before nightfall or face consequences. I thought he was just a crazy old man, but Mara was terrified. We argued fiercely when we returned to the van. Mara wanted to perform the ritual, simple enough, involving arranging 7 stones in a pattern and burning sage. while I refused to indulge what I saw as superstitious nonsense. In the end, my stubborn rationality won out. We're adults in the 21st century, I insisted, not characters in some horror movie. As dusk approached, we noticed 3 figures standing motionless on the cliff edge about 100 yards away, watching our van. When I raised my hand to wave, they didn't respond, just continued their silent vigil as the fog began rolling in again, thicker than before. That's when Mara noticed something chilling. The figures were too tall, their proportions subtly wrong, and they moved with an unnatural stillness when they finally turned away, disappearing into the darkening mist. The night descended with suffocating darkness, the fog so dense it seemed to absorb our headlamp's light. Around 10 p.m., the tapping returned, no longer just on the roof but all around us, like dozens of fingers drumming against every surface of the van. Mara clutched my arm, her fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "They're here," she whispered. I tried to maintain my skepticism, but when our phones simultaneously lost signal and the temperature inside the van plummeted until we could see our breath, even I couldn't deny something was happening. Then we heard the voices, whispers in a language I didn't recognize, seeming to come from inside the van with us. I finally gave in to Mara's pleas and frantically searched for stones outside while she prepared the sage. The moment I stepped outside, the whispers intensified, and through gaps in the swirling fog, I caught glimpses of elongated silhouettes circling our campsite. Their movements were fluid, yet wrong somehow, like watching a film where the frames skip. I gathered 7 stones with trembling hands, feeling watched from all directions. When I turned to head back, I realized with horror that I couldn't see the van anymore. The fog had completely enveloped it. I stumbled forward in what I thought was the right direction, calling for Mara, panic rising in my chest. Her scream cut through the night like a knife, high-pitched and abruptly silenced. I ran blindly toward the sound, colliding hard with the side of my own van, which materialized suddenly through the mist. The door was wide open, swinging gently. Inside, the space was empty. Mara was gone. The only trace of her was her necklace on the floor and strange, wet footprints that were definitely not human. Too long, too many toes, the impressions unnaturally deep in the vinyl flooring. On the wall, written in what looked horribly like blood, were words in that same strange language I'd heard whispered, except for one phrase in English: "The marked must pay." I frantically searched the surrounding area, screaming Mara's name until my voice gave out. The fog seemed to shift and play tricks. Several times I thought I saw her just ahead, only to find nothing but more mist. Hours passed in desperate, disoriented searching. Dawn finally broke, the fog receding just enough to reveal my surroundings clearly. That's when I saw them, the 3 figures from before, standing at the edge of the cliff. Between them was a 4th, smaller figure that I instantly recognized. Mara. They held her at the edge of the precipice, her body limp like a marionette. One turned to look directly at me, and though I couldn't make out a face in the shadow of its hood, I felt its malice like a physical blow. I sprinted toward them, screaming. They were toying with me. Each time I got within 20 yards, the fog would thicken impossibly, and they'd appear farther away, still holding Mara at the cliff's edge. This impossible chase continued until my legs buckled beneath me. When I looked up, they stood directly before me, close enough that I should have been able to see their faces beneath their hoods. Instead, there was only darkness and what looked like swirling mist where features should be. One reached out a hand that was too long, with too many joints, and pressed a cold finger to my forehead. Searing pain exploded behind my eyes as images flooded my mind. Centuries of rituals at this spot, travelers who had disrespected the sacred ground, their ultimate fates. Through the psychic onslaught, I understood with perfect clarity they wanted a sacrifice. The mark must pay, but they were giving me a choice. Me or Mara. The realization brought a wave of shame and terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. In that moment, a desperate plan formed in my mind. I staggered to my feet and bolted toward the van, feeling their pursuit like cold breath on my neck. I fumbled with the keys, started the engine with shaking hands, and gunned it directly toward the figures at the cliff's edge, where Mara stood swaying. At the last second, I swerved, leapt from the driver's seat, and tackled her away from the edge and the entities. We tumbled hard onto the rocky ground as my van careened over the cliff, smashing against the rocks hundreds of feet below. The entities made a sound like the ocean itself was screaming. A sacrifice had been made, but not the one they wanted. Clutching Mara, who was just beginning to stir in my arms, I ran with strength born of pure terror. The fog pursued us like a living thing, tendrils reaching for our ankles. But something had changed. The entities seemed bound to the sacred area we had unwittingly camped upon. The farther we got from Whispering Point, the thinner the fog became, until finally we stumbled onto Highway 1 and flagged down a passing truck. The driver was a local who took one look at our wild eyes and the identical marks on our skin and seemed to understand immediately. He drove us straight to a small shop in Carmel run by an old woman who claimed to be a healer. She performed a cleansing ritual, burning herbs and chanting over the marks until they faded from our skin like disappearing ink. "They'll be hunting you," she warned grimly. "The sacrifice bought you time, but not freedom. Never return to the coast." We used her phone to call for help, sitting in terrified silence as we waited. When Mara finally spoke, her voice was hollow with trauma. "I saw their world, Caleb," she whispered. "It's all around us, all the time. Thin places like Whispering Point are just where it bleeds through. And now, part of me is still there. They took something from me I'll never get back." We made it back to civilization physically intact, but irreparably changed. Mara returned to Chicago 2 days later, unable to even look at me without experiencing panic attacks. We haven't spoken since. I abandoned Vanlife completely, sold what possessions I had left, and moved into a small apartment in downtown Portland, as far from the coast as I could reasonably get. For months, I convinced myself we had experienced a shared psychosis, some kind of environmental toxin or gas that had caused hallucinations. The rational explanation was my security blanket, even as I installed extra locks on my doors and blackout curtains on my windows. 6 months passed before the tapping started again, gentle at first, like raindrops on my bedroom window. Then the familiar rhythm, deliberate and patient. The marks reappeared on my skin overnight, no longer just a single circle, but dozens of them, crawling up my arms like a disease. I consulted occult specialists, paranormal researchers, even flew to New Mexico to meet with the old woman's sister who supposedly had stronger abilities. Nothing worked permanently. The marks would fade after treatments only to reappear within days, each time more numerous, extending further across my body. Last week, I received a small package with no return address. Inside was Mara's necklace, the one she'd left behind in the van that had plunged into the Pacific. Attached was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. "The debt remains unpaid. The marked always return." That night, I woke to find my apartment filled with dense fog, even though all windows were closed. Through it, I could make out tall figures standing at the foot of my bed, their elongated fingers reaching toward me. But what truly broke me was seeing Mara standing among them. Her eyes now empty, swirling mist, her body moving with that same wrong fluidity as the entities. Now I understand the truth, the cruel twist of fate that's been waiting for me all along. The sacrifice they demanded was never about a life ended, but a life transformed. My van wasn't enough. In my desperate attempt to save Mara, I had condemned her to become one of them, and her first task as a watcher is to collect the debt I still owe. I'm writing this as a warning to others, though I know it's too late for me. Tonight, they'll come for the final time, and I won't resist. Some debts can never be escaped, only delayed. If you're ever driving the coast near Big Sur and see a turnout called Whispering Point, keep driving. No view, no matter how beautiful, is worth the price you might unknowingly agree to pay. I'm a vanlifer, always chasing freedom on the open road, but when I parked my van along the cliffs of Big Sur, I had no idea I'd stumble into something straight out of a nightmare. It started with a strange encounter at a gas station, then weird vibes at my campsite, and before I knew it, I was running for my life from someone, or something, tied to a twisted local myth about a killer who haunts the coast. The horror built fast, and just when I thought I'd figured it out, a gut punch twist turned everything upside down. It's a story of survival, bad choices, and a tragedy I'll never shake. I'm Ansel Warwick, 29 years old, from Fresno, California. I've been living the van life for 2 years, chasing sunsets and freedom from a desk job. My van, nicknamed Rusty, is my home, cramped, with a fold-out bed, a tiny stove, and a roof vent that rattles in the wind. Tonight, I'm parked at a secluded pull-out in Big Sur, where the redwoods meet the sea. It's just me and my buddy, Tilda Voss, 27, who's crashing with me for a week. She's a photographer from Oakland, always chasing the perfect shot, her camera slung around her neck like a lifeline. We met at a Vanlife meetup last year, bonded over cheap coffee and stories of sketchy parking spots. The air's salty, the stars are out, and we're laughing about a raccoon that tried to steal her tripod earlier. But something feels off, like the darkness here is thicker than usual. Tilda's sprawled on the passenger seat, editing photos on her laptop, her short blonde hair glowing under the van's fairy lights. I'm cooking ramen on the stove, the smell mixing with the ocean breeze sneaking through the cracked window. We're planning to hike to McWay Falls tomorrow, but Tilda keeps talking about a local myth she heard at a diner. A ghost story about a drifter who vanished on these cliffs decades ago, supposedly murdering campers before disappearing into the fog. I laugh it off, but her voice has this edge, like she half believes it. I check the locks on the van doors, a habit from too many nights in sketchy lots. The wind picks up, rattling the vent, and I catch myself glancing at the shadows outside. Just trees, I tell myself, but my gut's telling me this place is too quiet, too still. Earlier today, we stopped at a gas station in Lucia, a tiny spot with one pump and a grizzled clerk who stared too long. He mumbled something about sticking to the main roads when I asked about good camping spots. Tilda thought he was just being weird, but his words stuck with me. Now, parked here, I'm wondering if I should have listened. I shake it off, cracking a joke about the clerk being a secret serial killer, and Tilda snorts, but her eyes dart to the window. We're both tired from driving, and the horror of the day, burnt toast and a flat tire, feels like nothing compared to the unease creeping in now. I turn off the stove, and we settle in, the van creaking as we move. Outside, the ocean roars, but it's the silence between the waves that's got me on edge. I pull out my journal, scribbling about the day to calm my nerves. Tilda's humming a tune, her camera clicking as she tests a night shot through the window. I'm trying to focus on the stars, but I keep thinking about that clerk's warning. Big Sur's beautiful, sure, but it's got this wild, untamed vibe, like it's hiding secrets. I've parked in remote spots before, Joshua Tree, the Oregon coast, but this feels different, more disturbing. Tilda mentions the myth again, saying the drifter's ghost supposedly lures people off cliffs. I roll my eyes, but my hands gripping the journal tighter. The van's cozy, but the darkness outside feels like it's pressing against the windows, waiting for us to make a mistake. The van's roof vent rattles louder now, and I'm wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Tilda's snoring softly in the fold-out bed next to me, her camera clutched like a teddy bear. It's past midnight, and the ocean's roar feels like it's taunting us, each wave crashing with a disturbing rhythm. I can't shake the clerk's warning from earlier, and that stupid myth Tilda keeps yammering about is messing with my head. I decide to double-check the locks, but when I reach for the side door, I notice the handle feels loose, like someone tampered with it. My heart skips, and I tell myself it's just Rusty being old, but the horror of that thought sticks. I grab my flashlight, its beam shaky in my hand, and shine it outside. Nothing but trees and fog. Still, I'm not sleeping anytime soon. Tilda stirs when I accidentally bump the stove, knocking over a pot with a clang that feels way too loud. She mumbles, "What's your deal, Ansel?" I laugh it off, saying I'm just jumpy, but I tell her about the loose handle. She sits up, rubbing her eyes, and suggests we move the van to a campground we passed a few miles back, safer with other people around. I'm torn. Part of me wants to stay, prove I'm not spooked by some creepy story, but the other part's screaming to get out of here. We argue quietly. She's all for leaving, but I'm stubborn, thinking it's just nerves. Big mistake. I compromise, saying we'll leave at dawn. She groans but agrees, pulling her blanket tighter. The air feels heavier now, like the van's a bubble about to pop. I'm back in my bed, trying to chill, when I hear it, a faint crunch outside, like gravel under boots. My stomach drops, and I freeze, listening hard. It stops, then starts again, closer. I nudge Tilda, whispering, "You hear that?" She's half asleep, but nods, her eyes wide now. We stay still, the silence between crunches more terrifying than the sound itself. I'm thinking of every horror movie I've seen. Dumb campers who ignore the signs and end up dead. I grab my phone to call for help, but there's no signal out here. Classic Big Sur. Tilda's clutching her camera like it's gonna save us. I whisper that it's probably just an animal, but my voice cracks, betraying the lie. The crunching stops right by the van, and I swear I see the door handle twitch. I'm sweating now, my flashlight beam darting around the van's interior, catching Tilda's scared face. She suggests we start the engine and peel out, but I'm worried about drawing attention if someone's out there. My mind's racing. Maybe it's a hiker, or worse, someone tied to that drifter myth. I regret not listening to the clerk, regret parking in this isolated spot just to save a few bucks. I tell Tilda to stay quiet and grab the tire iron from under the seat, my hands shaking. The van feels like a trap, and every creak of the wind makes my skin crawl. I'm about to say let's risk driving when something scrapes against the van's side, slow and deliberate, like a knife dragging across metal. My heart's pounding so hard I can barely think. The scraping stops, but my heart's still hammering as I grip the tire iron, crouched by the van's door. Tilda's frozen, her camera shaking in her hands, her eyes locked on the window. The fog outside is so thick it's like the world's been swallowed, and the silence is worse than any sound. Then, a voice, low, raspy, almost inhuman, calls my name. Ansel. My blood runs cold. Nobody knows we're here, not even my mom back in Fresno. I whisper to Tilda, "You heard that, right?" She nods, her face pale, and I realize this isn't some animal or hiker. Something's seriously wrong, and the horror of it sinks in like a knife. I peek through the curtain, and for a split second, I see a figure in the fog, tall, too thin, holding something that glints like metal. I'm trying to stay calm, but my mind's screaming, replaying that Big Sur myth about the drifter who kills campers. Tilda's hissing at me to start the van, but my hands are shaking so bad I can barely hold the keys. The voice comes again, closer, saying, "Come out, Ansel. It's time." It's not just creepy, it's personal, and that's what's really disturbing. I fumble with the ignition, but Rusty's engine sputters, refusing to turn over. Of course, now's the time for my van to betray me, like something out of a bad slasher flick. Tilda grabs my arm, pointing to the side window where a shadow moves, slow and deliberate, circling us. It's not a ghost, it's real, and it's hunting us. I'm cursing myself for not leaving when Tilda suggested it, my stubbornness landing us in this nightmare. The figure stops by the door, and I hear a faint click, like someone's testing the lock. My stomach twists as I realize the loose handle from earlier wasn't Rusty's fault. Someone messed with it. I whisper to Tilda to get low, and we crawl to the back, hiding behind the bed. The van's walls feel paper thin, and every creak is a jolt of pure terror. I'm thinking of that gas station clerk, his warning about the main roads, and now I'm wondering if he knew something. Tilda's clutching her camera, muttering about recording evidence, but I'm too freaked out to care. Something heavy slams against the door, shaking the whole van. My flashlight's beam catches something scratched into the van's wall. Fresh marks, like letters, spelling leave. They weren't there yesterday, and my skin crawls at the thought of someone getting close enough to do this. The figure outside starts humming, a low, eerie tune that sounds like a twisted lullaby, and it's so wrong it makes my head spin. Tilda's crying now, whispering that we're gonna die, and I'm trying to shush her, but I'm not sure she's wrong. The horror's real now, no myth, no ghost story, just someone out there who wants us dead. I'm gripping the tire iron, ready to swing if they get in, but the van feels like a coffin, and I don't know how much longer we can hide. The van door rattles hard, and I'm clutching the tire iron, my knuckles white. Tilda's sobbing quietly, her camera abandoned on the floor. The humming outside stops, replaced by a sharp bang, like metal on metal, and I know we're out of time. I lunge for the driver's seat, jamming the key into the ignition. Rusty sputters again, but this time the engine roars to life, and I floor it, tires screeching on gravel. The figure in the fog leaps back, but I catch a glimpse of a face, pale, hollow-eyed, with a sick grin. It's no ghost, it's a man, and he's holding a hunting knife. The horror of it hits me like a punch. This guy's real, and he's trying to kill us. I swerve onto Highway 1, the van shaking as I push it to its limit. Tilda's screaming at me to go faster, her hands braced against the dashboard. The fog's so thick I can barely see the road, and the cliffs to my left drop straight to the ocean. One wrong move, and we're done. My mind's racing, piecing together the myth Tilda told me. That drifter who murdered campers, vanished, but maybe never left. This guy's got to be connected, some twisted copycat or worse. A rock smashes into the back window, shattering it, and Tilda shrieks. I glance in the rear view and see him sprinting after us, impossibly fast, like he's not human. The van's rattling, and I'm praying it holds together. I'm thinking of every horror story where the car breaks down, and I'm begging Rusty not to let me down now. We hit a sharp curve, and I nearly lose control, the tires skidding. Tilda's yelling about a ranger station a few miles up the road, but I'm not sure we'll make it. Headlights flash behind us, a truck gaining fast. My heart's in my throat as I realize it's him, chasing us down. The disturbing truth sinks in. He knew my name, like he's been watching us, maybe since the gas station. I made a dumb mistake parking in that isolated spot, ignoring the clerk's warning, and now it's life or death. I swerve to dodge another rock he hurls, and it clips the side mirror, cracking it. Tilda's trying to call 911, but the signal's still dead. The truck's bumper kisses our rear, and I'm gripping the wheel so hard my hands ache. I spot a narrow dirt road veering off the highway and take it, hoping to lose him in the redwoods. The van bounces over roots, branches scraping the sides like claws. Tilda's hyperventilating, muttering about the myth, saying the drifter lures people to their deaths on these roads. I'm not sure if it's him or some psycho playing into the legend, but I don't care. I just want out. The truck's headlights fade, but I'm not fooled. He's still out there. The dirt road narrows, and I realize too late it's a dead end, stopping at a cliff's edge. The ocean roars below, and the fog swallows everything. I kill the engine, and we sit in silence, listening for him. My pulse is deafening, and the horror of being trapped here, with nowhere to run, is suffocating. The van's engine ticks as it cools, and we're crouched in the dark, the cliff's edge just feet away. Tilda's breathing is shallow, her hand gripping mine so tight it hurts. The fog's so thick I can't see past the windshield, but I know he's out there, the man with the knife, tied to that disturbing drifter myth. I whisper to Tilda that we need to move, maybe hike back to the highway, but she's shaking her head, terrified. I'm kicking myself for taking that dirt road, my dumbest mistake yet, trapping us here. Then, a twig snaps nearby, and my heart stops. I grab the tire iron, ready to fight, but Tilda pulls out her camera, saying she's got evidence. I hiss at her to put it away, but she's stubborn, fumbling with the memory card. That's when I hear it, his voice, whispering my name again, right outside. I'm about to drag Tilda out the back when the fog parts, and there he is, standing 10 feet away, knife glinting. But his face, it's not the hollow-eyed man from before. It's the gas station clerk from Lucia, his grizzled features twisted into a snarl. The horror hits me like a tidal wave. He wasn't warning me. He was setting us up. The loose door handle, the creepy vibe, my name. He's been stalking us since we stopped for gas. I scream at Tilda to run, but she's frozen, camera raised like it'll save her. The clerk lunges, and I swing the tire iron, catching his arm. He howls, dropping the knife, and I grab Tilda, bolting toward the trees. My lungs burn as we stumble through the redwoods, the ocean's roar fading behind us. I think we're clear, but I've underestimated him. We're weaving through the forest, branches tearing at my skin, when Tilda trips, her ankle twisting with a sickening crack. She's crying, begging me to keep going, but I can't leave her. I try to help her up, but the clerk's on us, faster than I thought possible. He's got no knife now, but his hands are enough, grabbing Tilda's hair. I swing the tire iron again, but he dodges, and it's my second mistake, losing my weapon as it flies into the underbrush. The myth was wrong. He's no ghost, just a monster hiding in plain sight. I tackle him, but he's strong, pinning me down. Tilda's screaming, crawling toward the cliff, and I realize she's still got her camera. She throws it at him, a desperate move, and it smacks his head, giving me a second to break free. I'm scrambling to Tilda when she screams, "Ansel, the card." I don't get it at first, but she's pointing at the camera, now in the dirt. The clerk's dazed, but he's recovering, and I dive for the camera, realizing the memory card's got his face on it. Proof he's the killer. I grab it, but he's on me, his hands around my throat. Tilda, limping, shoves him, and he stumbles, teetering on the cliff's edge. For a moment, I think we've won, but then he grabs Tilda's arm, pulling her with him as he falls. Her scream cuts off as they vanish into the fog, the ocean swallowing them both. I'm alone, clutching the memory card, the horror of her loss crushing me. I stumble back to the van, the card my only proof, but it's a tragedy I'll carry forever. She's gone, and I let her die.